I might struggle a bit. All right. Welcome everybody to today's session. We'll just give it about 20 seconds or so people can get comfortable with the technology and join us today. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions today, please feel free to put them into the chat, and Asher and I will help respond to those as we go through the session. So we'll try to keep this to time today, but obviously if there's any questions, we can follow up after this event as well. Alrighty, for those that have just joined us, thank you very much for joining us today and for registering for this webinar, which is really today focused on a number of those different compliance standards and frameworks that we've all heard about. Sometimes keeps us up at night in terms of how we're going to address and satisfy those. But really what we want to do is, compliance starts with that IT visibility. So, the Ctrl+Alt+See of the world. So today we're going to go through some of those standards and how IT visibility can help address some of those controls. Just to remind everyone, this is part of our webinar series that we're running each month. So we're going to move into October with Beyond Visibility, which is going to focus a lot on our cloud management capability. Cloud cost is just one part of that. And Danny will take us through in October how we extend beyond just visibility in the cloud. In November, roughly around the 13th or so, we will target a sustainability-focused event there as well. So keep a watch out for the invitations there. Today's session on compliance frameworks, we will record this session and have that available on demand as well. So keep a lookout for that. If you've missed this session as well and you're just catching up on it now, that's great to watch that on demand and to share that out internally within your organizations. So today we're going to focus in on how IT visibility solves a problem around those compliance frameworks. And really for us, it's important that there is a lot of crossover in terms of how we can address some of those controls and satisfy the controls within those frameworks, both with IT visibility or with IT asset management or SaaS management. There are elements here around cloud costing and FinOps, but today we're really just going to narrow down that focus on one of the main topics that is often brought up around those compliance frameworks is software currency, hardware currency, and just complete visibility across that space. So the goal for us is to focus on that, but don't, obviously as well, make sure that you're aware of what else is out there to help with the other controls. IT visibility forms part of that solution to address those. One of the good things around working with Flexera is ensuring that you have that complete visibility across each of those areas. And like I said in the previous webinar around Shadow SaaS is, we're heavily invested in the three areas on your screen. So whether it's ITAM, SaaS management, or FinOps, we believe that the markets have converged in most cases already, or they're converging in a lot of areas. So with Flexera One, we can drive a lot of those outcomes using our platform. All right, so the core of the topic today is really looking at these compliance frameworks. Now, originally we had the Essential 8, the APRA, and the CIS controls. I've added NIST into this as well because it's pertinent to the conversation and one that it came up in between doing the research for this particular event. Now, we're going to go over each of these and we're going to dive into how Flexera satisfies a number of the controls against each of these different frameworks. For NIST, we're really looking here at the Cybersecurity standard, which is a predominantly US-based framework of cybersecurity standards and controls. I don't know how many times I will say cybersecurity on this call today, but really this is one of the de facto standards globally when we start to look at NIST and vulnerability management. It does come up in a number of organizations looking to adopt the standard, but it ties quite nicely in with ITAM requiring visibility and governance of software and hardware to meet those security baselines. Next is the Essential 8, which is a homegrown standard based out of the Australian cybersecurity centres. There's way too many acronyms, but this looks at those top 8 mitigation strategies, builds that into a maturity model, and really at the crux of it relies on up-to-date software and patching. In terms of APRA, once again, a local Australian standard, but this is the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority's Information Security Standard. There are 2 specific standards that we will look at today, but in each of these, it mandates asset visibility, control, and lifecycle management to protect regulated entities, so particularly those in the FSI space. And finally, the CISC controls. So these are a set of global prioritized cybersecurity best practices. Once again, this is typically we see this across a number of different organizations trying to adopt a best practice standard framework around cybersecurity, very similar in that regard to NIST. And really what this does, it depends on those effective execution of accurate IT asset inventory and keeping software and hardware current. So what we want to do now is just jump into the first of those frameworks. And when we start to look at NIST, and like I said, specifically the cybersecurity framework, which is the version 2.0, this is one that was released in February, or rather updated in February 2024. So what this is doing is providing a guidance to industry, government and government agencies and other organizations to manage cybersecurity risk. It's not mandatory, so it is a voluntary adoption. So this is not mandated currently in any organization. What we are seeing, though, is often organizations will adopt the ISO 27001 standard, or in some cases, especially non-corporate, we see the Essential 8 being adopted instead of NIST. But NIST can provide a much broader framework to work within. What it does is it's broken down into 6 particular functions. Within those functions, they have categories, and the flow onto that is 106 subcategories. So those subcategories contain multiple different controls for things like asset management or risk assessment. And what we've done actually is we've mapped a number of those where we have a direct impact or where an enabler for help mitigating that particular control. On the right-hand side here, what you'll see is those 19 where we have a very solid direct ability to satisfy the control. So, for example, if I look at the ID AM1, which happens to be at the top of that list, is where we look at hardware inventory maintained. It has something very core to what we do with IT visibility. So, collecting the hardware details, providing updates to those hardware details, and managing lifecycle information around that. Where we do see enablers of those controls. So these are things that not necessarily will have a direct impact on that control, but will have information that can help lead into managing that control. So a lot of those cases where people process technology are required as well to address that. One of those is the ID, so as part of the identity again, risk assessment number 4. So where it talks about impacts and likelihoods assessed. So we can indirectly cover this through with ITV through providing currency and vulnerability information. So both of those data points really help drive and inform on the impact and likelihood when doing risk assessment. So it can form part of a matrix for organizations taking on that challenge. Next one, when we start to look at Essential 8, so this is one I believe most of the Australian companies on this call today will actually have heard of and maybe wondering about how to implement that within their own environments. So when we start to look at this is from the Australian Signals Directorate as a part of their Australian Cybersecurity Centre. One of the good things about this is it's quite a straightforward model in terms of using those 8 maturity models that have different stages that you can work through and assess yourself against those different stages. So one of the key things with this particular framework is that since July 2021, maturity level 2 has been mandatory for non-corporate government Commonwealth entities. So under the Public Governance Performance and Accountability Act, for those at home that want to know what the PGPA Act is. In terms of this framework, so it's often chosen over NIST because it has been developed within Australia by the ASD there. It's also tailored to local threats, regulations, and risk appetite. So we do see a lot more in Australia because of that reason. The other thing in terms of Essential 8 versus NIST, NIST is still once again a voluntary framework, whereas Essential 8 is mandatory for those organisations, non-corporate Commonwealth entities. We see Essential 8 being the best fit for those, but with NIST in particular, we see those as being a best fit for risk management, maturity, and global alignment type of organisations. Now, where this neatly overlaps as well with ITAM or ITV with the Flexera 1 platform is typically around currency, so making sure that software and hardware is up to date, not gone end of life, end of support, visibility, so you can't enforce or the 8 framework standards without understanding what assets actually exist out there, and governance as well. So, do we have challenges around admin privileged access within the environment, multi-factor authentication, and ensuring that there's a tight relationship with asset mapping. So being able to highlight some of the infer in a lot of cases, a lot of those where admin access might be granted and a whole bunch of non-approved software is out there as an example. Next one on the list is the APRA standard. So this is where we look at the different CPSs 234 and 230. One sort of is the not supersedes, but it complements each other in terms of one looks at operational risk, which is the CPS 230 there, which was the newer one released at the 1st of July in 25. And the CPS 234, which was mainly focused on information security, which was released back in July 2019. These are both a set of mandatory requirements. So like the Essential 8, these are mandatory, not voluntary, but apply to FSI in terms of banks, insurers, and superannuation funds across Australia. There is a number of key overlaps in this space where we start to look at asset visibility, ensuring that we can see all of our internal IT assets, the SaaS and the cloud assets, resilience and continuity in 230 there. So looking at things that are unsupported or shadow IT to help continuity planning. Third-party oversight, so something we won't cover today, but where we do have a lot of third-party suppliers in the mix, especially with the SaaS usage. So who's using what in the cloud and understanding that side. Policy enforcement, so around risk policies, around consumption, misconfiguration, and access. So there are a number of Flexera 1 technologies that touch on that, and audit and reporting as well. So being able to grab a lot of that data and integrate it with other systems, particularly your ITSM with your CMDBs there for defensible compliance reporting. The final one here is the sys controls. So once again, these are globally recognized, so very similar in nature to NIST, and it's recognized as a set of best practices for cyber defense. So maintained by the Center for Internet Security as a US non-profit there, but first published in 2008. This current standard, which is version 8 of the controls, which was published 4 years ago in 21. Once again, they're very similar to NIST in that these controls are not mandatory, whereas the Essential 8 and APRA regulations are mandatory for particular industries there. But with CIS is one of those that are adopted as well across a number of organizations, focusing on 18 domains. Typically, it's seen as a more prescriptive sort of how-to set of practices rather than NIST. And that's why often the CIS controls will be adopted over NIST there. Some of those relationships and direct overlaps we typically see across controls in 1 to 4, 7, and 15. You can see here the very similar theme to the other ones in terms of asset inventory, software inventory. Vulnerability management is directly called out in this framework. So we provide that ability of end-of-life systems and looking at integrated with NIST and for the National Vulnerability Database side. Secure configuration and also around service provider management. One of the other indirects are very similar as well with the direct and indirect to NIST for Flexera. Here is a number of those controls under 3, 5, and 17. So how do we provide data and information back into help support a number of those other controls? So one of the ones I picked out here was around number 17, so the incident response. So being able to have a list of software and hardware and details about those endpoints and the support and supportability of those endpoints to help provide defensible evidence there. So that sums up the 4 particular controls that we're looking at today. What we want to do is, just for reference, I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but there are other standards that have a relationship with or within particular countries, there are specific standards that those countries adopt. Now, when I start to look at different frameworks, we can see NIST, particularly globally, particularly within Australia and New Zealand. Oftentimes across Asia, there's ISO 27001 is adopted more than NIST. In terms of the others, Essential 8s and APRAs, there are different regulations in those different countries. This is by no means a definitive list. So there are things that would be called out separate to this. This was just a quick overview and quick research into what those standards look like in other countries. So where Flexera can also help satisfy a number of those controls. Now, the way that we do that is we start to look at IT visibility as being the source in terms of how we want to manage, maintain, and provide information back into those controls. And as you can see here, is the goal for us is to collect all that information from as many different data sources as possible to help plug all the blind spots within your organization and to be the centralized place within the technology intelligence platform to help maintain a level of asset visibility. And this is across not only end user compute and servers, but integration with platforms for network devices and other assets that you have out there, and provide a level of categorization, provide currency and obsolescence information and reporting against software and hardware, overlay information around vulnerabilities and threats, and also give a view of sustainability. So there's a lot of great information that we can curate, provide back to customers out there, and also satisfy those controls as a byproduct of that. Now, I found a good reference, and there's a number of Australian customers that are using IT visibility today, but Hitachi Energy was one that there's a nice public reference that talks about those particular compliance frameworks and using IT visibility to satisfy those frameworks. Now, for them, it was all about overlapping IT assets, in the need to get lifecycle views, and there's increased risk and costs. Because of that lack of visibility, there's a significant manual process that was driving headaches within Hitachi, and also there's no centralized view. So what we were able to do with Hitachi is go in there, put in IT visibility, gave them that full view of software and hardware assets, with the Technopedia library, enhancing those assets with lifecycle currency information, which helped them satisfy the regulation compliance that they had. And obviously, I think one of those in Europe being DORA, and HIPAA and others in the United States in the healthcare, but ensuring that there's a number of different standards, of course, globally. And also the goal of that was then to deliver up-to-date inventory data on a continuous basis to make sure that they're always being in compliant from that perspective. So what I'll do now, I will jump right into our platform, and we'll take you through some of those particular controls and standards and how IT visibility can manage that for you. So let me just jump over here. Flexera. Fantastic. So just wait till that comes up. There we go. So for those that already have IT visibility today, or actually looking into it, you can get access to that just on the left-hand side here. Obviously, it's part of our bigger platform, so there are a number of key things on the left-hand side and capabilities. But what IT visibility will do is collect data from a number of different sources. So, whether that's through SCCM, whether that's through the Flexera agent or different integrations with different platforms, we can bring all of that data into the same view in your screen. You'll see a number of those out-of-the-box reports in front of you. These can be used to solve a number of those challenges. We also have the ability to create custom reports in here. So if you want to get a very tailored view, a very specific lens on this data, go through, create your own reports. In here, you can go through and create a custom report based on the data and the data model that exists and backs these out-of-the-box reports. Now, having a look at the hardware side, and I want to start with a couple of reports here, but as you can see, there is a number of different reports here serving different needs and different stakeholders within your business. But from a hardware inventory overview perspective, this is what we get here in terms of number of manufacturers, products, models, and devices out there. So I get a nice, neat breakdown of everything that exists within the platform. I can then also use this to drill into those. So if I just want my counts, the visuals on this screen to focus in on Apple, I can break that down and focus just in on my Apple products. So anything I can do in Power BI, I can do on the screen in front of you. I can then get the detailed view and this more tabular view on the screen, a summary of those devices, serial numbers, all of that data that you would expect from in ITAM as well. But the key thing here as well is the actual lifecycle insight. So out of that 4,602 devices, I can see what that breakdown is of what's actually obsolete in the environment, what's actually end of sale, and also what's still part of that general availability. So I can go out and buy that today. I get a really good breakdown in terms of what are those hardware obsolete models by year. I can then drill into a particular data point. So, for example, last year, I just want to see all of those and the counts of those from last year that have gone end of life and or obsolete. So what I can see here is, a number of different devices, 80 odd devices here. I can drill into the details if I need to see the hardware details behind that and get that list and start my asset lifecycle refresh as part of that. The good thing here is I get a general overview in terms of my category and subcategory of my hardware, exactly where they sit in terms of, generally available, what's becoming end of sale or obsolete. And I can see where my most at risk is in terms of the devices here. So I can sort of manipulate the data. I can see where I've got the most deployed workstations. Actually, there's not that much in terms of risk. Where I have 300 servers, there's a high degree of risk here because 79% of those are now obsolete. So it's a good place to start. In terms of software, so software is really where we want to drive into a number of, very complex currency and risk views. So when I want to drill into that particular data, once again, we go through that curation and normalization process using the Technopedia libraries here. I'll get a normalized view of all of those software manufacturers within the list here. I can see how many products and versions available, and then releases, but also then the number of installs. So the application that has the most risk is usually with the widest number of installs out there. That may have, version sprawl as well. So I can see exactly what's out there in my environment. I can see the number of installs. I can see the number of versions behind. So, in this case here, these distro packages, which C++ or your .NETs, typically we will find that these will be quite a number of versions behind. So I wanted to understand that better. I want to see how many installs are out there, and in this case, obsolete or end of life, and derive that risk out of the environment that way. I can get a breakdown once again of the hardware and the software on those machines, where it sits. I can see, a number of different data points here. The one that I want to focus on it a little bit more is the lifecycle information. So once again, when I'm looking at satisfying those compliance controls, I can drive into a number of those different data points here. Technopedia is providing this rich set of information to say that 77% of my estate is, in terms of software, is now obsolete. So there's a risk associated with that. As part of the Essential 8, as part of APRA, I can actually see what my most, not current software that exists within the environment, and look at what my mitigation strategies are for those. And I can once again filter on that and then understand that view. Now, the other side as well is, as I want to start to look at my perspective on the vulnerability side, so I can then drill into security. And what we do here is we use actually the NIST National Vulnerability Database, but also the Security Research, which is a Flexera company, and then to look at overlaying information about those two data sources with the currency library from Technopedia to build out a very rich data set of, where's my most vulnerable assets, but also are they covered by a patch that's available from a vendor, or do we need to completely replace that in its entirety? So I can really start to drill into the data. I can see how many CVEs have been tagged to software that exists within the environment. I can see which devices actually have those vulnerabilities. How can they, what's the attack vector? So, if that can be done by remote, or they have to be physically on the network within the local system to execute those vulnerabilities, and the different CVE counts. Now, the one view here, which is highly recommended to look into, and we start to look at how do we know what software needs to be updated and what's the next course of action. So the goal here is to look at, do I have this CVE in the environment? This is our security ID, which will give us whether or not that particular product has been patched. So the vendor has a patch for that. But also as well is, what is my recommendation in terms of, do I need to upgrade that? What's the recommendation from the vendor? And in this case here, it's an older version of Microsoft Office. There's some details about what KB patch would need to be applied to that piece of software to remediate that. So that was a short, and just stop sharing for a second there, but that was just a short overview about how we can actually go through and satisfy a number of those different requirements against APRA, Essential 8, NIST, and the CIS controls. I think it's important that we start to investigate together how we can help, and we have gone through the exercise of mapping that to NIST. So happy to share that if you want to reach out, and we can get you a little bit more ahead of where you are today. Please do reach out. I've put a QR code here to link to me back onto LinkedIn. I'm happy if you want to reach out, discuss this more, learn more about how IT visibility can help solve some of those complex challenges with those different frameworks, and talk about how we can help with some of the content that we've already produced to help other customers as well who are also facing the same challenges. So once again, thanks for your time today, and looking forward to catching up again next month on Beyond Visibility with Cloud Cost.